being here, everyone, giving me your attention rather than obsessively checking the Brexit news. So, gonna give the talk in a moment, just a preliminary. So, when it comes to questions during the talk, I think that questions are a privilege, not a right, and LSE faculty have not earned the right to be trusted with those questions. So anyone who's not LSE faculty, please feel free to ask me application questions. My colleagues, just stay curious, and please give me tenure. Okay, so as mentioned, this is joint work with Heisen Dunn, my co-author. So this is a joint production in most aspects, but she is first author, and that's really reflective of something. In particular, at one point in the talk, I'm going to summarize the results of a case study. Unfortunately, that really is her work, and so I can summarize the results for you, but if you want detailed discussion of the case study, email me and I'll set up a conversation, but that's just to acknowledge limitation, right? Okay, what are we talking about today? Well, the broad issue we're interested in, and this is work in progress, so comments you make today could be helpful for us in refining the paper. But the broad issue for us is what are we licensed to infer from the fact that something appears as the conclusion to a published article when all is going well. So we're both social epistemologists of science. We're trying to think, what does it tell us if something has had whatever kind of stamp of approval exists when something appears as the conclusion to a published article. It's got that far through the stage of scientific inquiry, not necessarily further. Now, I'm going to say a bit more about that when all is going well in a second, because that qualification matters. But to get a sense of what got us thinking about this is we're both interested in the replication crisis in the social sciences, parts of medicine, parts of neuroscience, as far as that's not social science. And what's been found in recent times, what's been sort of vividly drawn to people's attention, is that many results which people thought were secure turn out not to be replicable. It turns out that things which were getting through the system regularly just don't hold up on further scrutiny. So a question that's tempting to ask is, what's going wrong? How come this is happening? But we're kind of interested in the question of what would we expect in the good case? If we're to infer that this is a case of something going wrong, where changes must be made, it might be useful to have a theory of things going right, and what it would mean. Would we get anything like this kind of replication crisis in an ideal case? So we want to think about sort of an ideal type of a scientific publication process, and what comes out at the end of that, and then hopefully that'll help us get a grip on this question of what can we reasonably expect from science if we're going to make reforms in light of something like the replication crisis. What can we hope for? So what should we be aiming for? That's the sort of the motivation behind the issue, and we're going to get into recondite analytic philosophy later. But important to bear in mind that this is what's motivating us. So hopefully, what we say will eventually have relevance for that question, even if that's not directly what we're focusing on here. So about that when all is going well. And so what we're going to assume is something like the following. These are vague, but they're about the level of specificity we need. Two things. I'll deal with the second one first, it's kind of a key thing. We're not interested in cases of fraud or research misconduct or something like that, or where the reviewers just failed to notice something which was an obvious error, a mistake in simple mathematics, something like that. No, let's assume that whatever it is the review process is doing it well, people haven't committed any kind of obvious sins, and so any kind of objections based on that kind of consideration we're going to set aside. We're going to assume we're dealing with a more ideal society and that kind of stuff. Secondly, and this is going to play a more important argumentative role for us really, at various times we're going to assume that the scientific community is roughly well arranged to bring about desirable social epistemic results. And so what we mean by that is, firstly, we're going to take our cue for what roughly would be good from what people seem to be trying to do now. We're going to assume that the scientific community isn't perfect, because in fact things like fraud occur, but something like what it's currently doing does represent a good epistemic practice, and it's bad to be too far out of line with that. And, well, I mean, and secondly, that we're going to seriously endorse that good epistemic practice. We're going to assume that it's doing whatever it wants to do well, and that's the thing we should want to do. And so there is some reason to sort of stay in line with it. And so what we're thinking about then is, what can we infer if all is going well in a well-arranged social epistemic community, and it has something like our peer review process, except where the agents are more habitually honest. And at the end of that, things are getting published. Okay, I'm a reader of that paper which has come through that process. What do I now know? What information stage should I take myself to be in vis-a-vis the conclusions coming out of that? So that, speaking roughly and broadly, is the sort of situation we're considering, again, because we hope it will give us some kind of purchase on thinking about the replication crisis, or how we want to arrange actual scientific communities where these assumptions don't always hold. And so the big idea behind the paper was to think through an area of analytic philosophy which isn't often connected to this. So me and Haisin, we're both philosophers of science, trained in kind of the normal tradition for philosophers of science. And it doesn't actually have as much connection as you might think with what's going on in mainstream analytic epistemology. And that means we think that there are opportunities for drawing connections which thus far haven't been exploited, and which we want to kind of draw attention to now. So like another thing we want to do is kind of encourage more of this kind of crossover work. And in particular, there's a whole lot of work in analytic epistemology thinking about assertion, where assertion has roughly its normal meaning. It's kind of putting forward a claim about the world. And the project in this bit of epistemology is to think, well, it seems like assertion is held to standards. You can act felicitously or act poorly in asserting. There are times when you might censure someone for asserting when they ought not have, things like that. And they think about what are the norms which guide that behavior. What are the standards we're holding people to? What underlies our practice of assertion? And indeed, often, this is from where we get our title, that even say that these norms are constitutive of assertion. What it means for something to be an assertion is for it to be the kind of thing which is properly held to those norms. Now, this is all quite high level. I'm going to be going through examples of what kind of norms they discuss, and I hope that'll make it clearer. But sort of the high level point that we realized is that none of the norms which analytic philosophers are coming up with, which are meant to constitute assertion in the normal case, seem to us that they'd be appropriate for science. And so these kind of, the conclusions of scientific papers, whatever they are, they're not assertions, at least insofar as the analytic philosophy literature is correctly kind of characterizing assertions. And so we think that tells us something, and we think that's actually, as you'll see, revealing as to like what kind of thing science is social epistemically, what we can hope from it, what we can get out of it. So, right, one more bit of preliminary. So, to avoid question begging, given that what we're ultimately going to say is that the norms of assertion that have been studied do not properly govern, it would be a mistake to hold the conclusions of scientific papers to those standards. We introduce some awkward terminology just to sort of avoid the question of whether or not they're really assertions, whether or not these norms really do constitute assertion. We call them scientific public avowals. I'll just say avowals in this talk. Where these avowals are the utterances used to communicate chief results. So conclusions in peer-reviewed journals, what you might say is the central point of a conference presentation, the main result on a poster, an online preprint, etc. These avowals are meant to be the things which tell the rest of the scientific community what it is that a research group takes itself to have established on the basis of its research. What it is that people think they can now put forward, having done some scientific inquiry into the world. And so we're going to think, do any of the norms of assertion govern these avowals, or maybe all any of the norms of these norms of assertion govern these avowals, given that what we're thinking about is how would avowals work in the ideal case. So ideally, do any of these norms govern those govern us avowals. And in light of that, all these norms govern our actual avowals. That's what we're interested in. So the argument structure. First I'll go through the case study. Really high sin does deserve the credit for this. And that will allow me to sort of illustrate, get on the table, roughly what we're thinking. Next, we'll see how it generalizes. We'll say it's not just special idiosyncratic features of this case study which make it appropriate for our argument, but rather, this is really getting at something about the social epistemology of science. We'll consider some objections, because maybe you won't be convinced foolishly. And then we'll conclude that actually me and Hassan are right, and so you should agree with us. So that's the broad structure of the argument of the paper and of the argument of this talk. To do that though, just because I'm guessing what people will be familiar with or not, it is worth going through what the norms of assertion literature is saying, and in particular we think, we'll stand by this bold claim, but all of the norms of assertion currently countenanced in the anti-philosophy literature fall into one of these three classes. The first are the factive norms, which say an assertion is apt only if it's true. And so here the idea, of course, is not that anytime people make an assertion, in fact they're saying a true thing, they're right, people lie, make mistakes, etc. But they're just saying it's always, you can always say criticize something, they've done something wrong in virtue of asserting something if it's false. That's one large class of norms. The most famous of them is Timothy Williamson, who says that if you assert something, you have to know it, and knowledge is factive, and so this would be an example of such a norm, but there are many others. So that's one class of norm of assertion which has been proposed. Next, epistemic. So sometimes people think that there are certain scenarios where it's not fair to criticize someone because they said a false thing, or at least if you want to separate the question of criticism or norm eval, someone has done something normatively proper when they assert something, even if it's not true, so long as it's justified, where justification is something weaker than truth. And so these are the epistemic norms. They're also quite common. Here the idea is you to have evidence or some kind of proper process led you to make the assertion or something like that. So these are the epistemic norms. And finally, there's a kind of common second order where people will say, no, it's not that you need to actually say true things, not that you need to actually say justified things, but as long as you believe you're saying a true or justified thing when you're speaking, or that you know it when you're speaking, then your assertion is apt. And so, broadly, these are the three classes of norms of assertion which the anti-philosophy literature has said are common. Said that govern our assertions, and so that's what we're going to be saying isn't apt to apply to scientific public avowals. Okay. So here's the case study. Now, as I mentioned, this is a work in progress, but there is a draft available, and because I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm not able to describe this case study in full detail, email me if you're interested. I can send you the paper, and you'll see the case study in full detail. Okay, it's in the early 20th century, it's a very well-documented case of William Henry Bragg studying what we now think call X-rays, and arguing at length that they must have a particle component. I mean, he said a lot of things, but for a particular theory of the X-ray. One of the reasons this is so well studied is partly because the correspondence went on for so long, so it was him and another scientist, his name I forget, but another very famous scientist of his day, and so sort of two greats duking out in literature. But also relevantly, he engaged in a lot of private correspondence and diary entries about this, which became public, which is only relevant for my purposes. And so we have quite a lot of information on sort of what he was thinking, what the state of literature he was responding to was, etc., when he engaged in this dispute. And it turns out, after later inquiry, Bragg was wrong about X-rays, because he contributed useful things which went towards our current theory of the X-ray, but it's not the case that we now think that Bragg had a correct theory of X-rays. He didn't justify it. Indeed, and this is relevant to the next point, he didn't even think he justified it. There was actually quite a lot of evidence against his claim whenever he was publishing. He was saying things on the lines of, in his letters to people, like, all things considered, it doesn't look like these claims are justified, but I think it's useful for someone to make the case. And so, like, likewise, he didn't believe it to be true or justified. So he engaged in this very famous correspondence debating his theory of, or explanation for the phenomenon we now think of as X-rays. He was wrong. He wasn't justified even by his own lights, and nor did he even think it was true. He thought there was something dialectically useful back in getting the work out there. And, with qualification, in second, the scientific community doesn't think poorly of his work. Now, to be clear, this is the qualification. The claim is not that he got a Nobel Prize for these essays in particular, but he got a Nobel Prize for some other work, but in broadly it was recognition from the scientific community that this was a very good work, it was a very good piece of scientific conduct. People do not study this with an eye to criticizing him or his behaviour. In general, the run of this inquiry was viewed to be very successful. And so what we seem to have then is a sort of a case of a famous scientist engaging in this long-running, very fruitful, very productive scientific inquiry, regularly publishing papers. A lot of this happened through Nature, I believe. Making avowals about the nature of X-rays, which would apparently violate all of them. They'd at least be critiquable as avowals. Now, more on that in a moment, but they'd at least be critiquable as avowals, according to, they'd at least be critiquable as assertions, according to the analytic philosophy literature. And yet, it seems at no point has the scientific community thought to censor him. Indeed, the suggestion, as far as we know, hasn't been made that this was inappropriate behavior on his part. And we think, this isn't just a quirk of the case. It's not just that Bragg was doing something very unusual in this debate, or maybe out of deference to the great figure, people are avoiding raising the awkward questions and the like. No, we think that what was going on in this case is revelatory about the kind of thing science is and how it is that science can advance. And so we think the fact that these avowals were so useful in advancing the discourse is going to generalize and tell us something about science. So here's a really awkwardly worded slide, which I spent ages trying to do better. So the assumption we're going to use, both in interpreting that case, but especially for generalizing it, is that it can't be the case that a good norm for scientific public avowal would judge avowals that are necessary for scientific communication to be outlined in the norm for scientific public avowal. This is something along the lines of, like, the norm for scientific public avowals can't be the case that you are sort of always critiquable for doing exactly what you need to do in making some scientific public avowals. And this is important to be clear about the nature of this, because one thing which is very hard to do, I don't know if there is a way of doing this, is kind of distinguish between intuitions that something is maybe bad in and of itself, but all things considered good, versus bad as an instance of whatever it's meant to be. And this assumption is us trying to get on the table, that we're assuming that it can't be bad as an instance of what avowals are meant to be, that they do what is necessary to advance science. It can't be the case that science is somehow kind of always puts you in a normative bind, or at least systematically puts you in a normative bind, if you're going to do what's good for the scientific community, at least in the ideal case. Remember that we're considering a kind of ideal scientific community. So this is poorly worded, but that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get this idea that science can't be self-unendorsing. Its norms of avowal can't be the case that they rule out the successful prosecution of collective inquiry. Okay, so with that assumption on the table, let us move on. So the first thing to note about the Bragg case, which is typical, is that there was a kind of division of labour. Different scientists were working with different materials. In fact, it was the fact that they were using different materials to generate their experiments which generated a dispute between Bragg and his interlocutors. Different scientists have different specializations, which make them look at things in a different way. And just in general, in the course of inquiry, we expect scientists, indeed we require scientists for it to work anything like it does, to spread out across logical and methodological space and explore different options therein. Experience teaches us that when they do this, they disagree with each other. Maybe not forever, but at least during active inquiry and sort of that research frontier at the forefront, they don't come to the same conclusion. Which means at least some of them, assuming the law of non-contradiction, have to be saying false things, right? Maybe that's even true if you deny the law of contradiction. But at least some of them have to be saying false things. And, in that case, we say, if we think that the division of labour is a necessary feature of scientific inquiry, as we think it is, and if we think it's inevitable that if you do this, that disagreements will arise, it can't be that your norm for public avowals rules out anyone who happens to be saying a false thing, because someone has to be. Some people in this group just have to be saying something which will turn out to be false. And so, insofar as we grant our assumption, we think the division of labour and some historical facts about what this results in, what we know this results in, suggest to us that, therefore, one can't hold avowals to the standard, at least of factive norms, or any analogue of the factive norms in the case of scientific public avowals. And you could think of this as a kind of instance of maybe what the pessimistic meta-induction is getting at, where the pessimistic meta-induction is a kind of division of labour across time, where the whole history of science is people getting things wrong all the time, basically. Our predecessors in different eras were saying all sorts of things, which we now think don't hold up in light of what we came to know. Indeed, there's an argument from Carl Stanford, perhaps in light of what they could have known, but people just don't tend to be thinking at the time. People could always be doing better, but we just tend not to be. And just in general, this is whatever it is that motivates people to carry out the pessimistic meta-induction seems pertinent here. It seems like evidence that the kind of thing science is, it progresses through people like Bragg making the kind of mistakes they make. And so any kind of norm of avowal which would say it's improper to avow false things would be sort of ruling us all out in the long run, or at least ruling most of us out, or a very great number of us out, or something like that. So these are kind of focusing on the factive norms. But we think that if you grant the following totally non-controversial principle about how evidence works, that was sarcastic, then we also think it might rule out we think it does rule out the epistemic norms, where the fact is that in many cases, if you're at the forefront of inquiry, there's lots of people putting forward lots of claims about how the phenomena you're studying work. They can't all be true, and if you take into account not just what's coming from your paper, but what's coming out of the whole literature on this, then your assertion, or your public avowal, won't be justified in light of the total evidence being produced by a scientific field at any given time. Also, you could also have the kind of second order consideration of, this would be to kind of grant more to anti-realists than people want to grant, so out there, but not necessarily going to rest my case on it. But you might also think, again, insofar as you find the pessimistic meta-induction tempting, in light of my total evidence about how reliable science is, maybe, again, I just know that in the long run, this will not, I probably wouldn't be justified in believing this as opposed to doing something else with it, with the sort of Van Frausen discusses maybe. And so again, it's not like something I'd be justified in asserting were it to be an assertion. And finally, you can think of cases which we assume inquiry has to delve into? Well, we kind of know, we think, or at least our best theory tells us there is going to be a weak or noisy signal from nature, and that the best methods of inquiry we have so far aren't that good at taking this out and filtering out the noise. And so we kind of know that even following our best methodological or experimental protocols, any one paper can't do that well in justifying its claim. And yet we think often it happens that the only way for inquiry to advance is for such work to be published, for us to see the results of applying those methods, and to gradually learn how to do better by actually engaging in the process of science and putting these claims out there, saying what would result from applying these methods to this kind of data, even though the conclusion thereby it wouldn't be justified, given our total evidence, including not just the evidence gathered from experiment, but also the evidence about the kind of process this is, the kind of things our methods are capable of, etc. And so we think that not only is there reason to be concerned about these factive norms ruling out a whole bunch of avowals as inapt, even though the reason they're inapt reflects deep features about how science advances, how it is we're able to do predictive inquiry. Also, in light of kind of total evidence considerations, so too the epistemic norms would rule out a large number of assertions which in fact we need to make, a large number of avowals which in fact we need to make. Would rule those out as inappropriate too. And finally, you assume that science can't require bad faith with its participants. It's not the case that scientists just need to be deluded or unaware of all of the previous. Scientists can read philosophy books, they just don't. Right? So they could have read about the pessimistic meta-induction. If they're in the replication crisis, if they're in any of the fields affected by the replication crisis right now, they're well aware of the fact that often their best methods and best experimental protocols, when faced with weak signals and noisy data, are only so good. They're aware of all these things. In the ideal case, we assume it's, I don't know, some kind of enlightenment principle. You can't require people to act in bad faith to participate in the community. And so, the second order norms couldn't be required of them either. They can know full well that probably not justified, probably not true. And yet still we think they're doing something proper insofar as you grant the assumption that something like how we do science is a good mode of inquiry, which we all engage in as a society, and maybe more specifically, it's not the sense of it too specific, and we ought to engage in it even in those cases where you'll get weak signals and noisy data. And so, that's the core of the argument. The core of the argument is just that there have been all of these norms for assertion put forward, which require that assertions are inapt if they're false, unjustified, or maybe believed to be such, or it's not believed to be true or justified. But it turns out, reflecting on the social nature of science, reflecting on its history, we think it turns out that actually good science requires that we publish things which are false. Good science requires we publish things which are unjustified in light of our total evidence. And good science requires, good science permits that scientists can be well aware of those facts. They can be fully self-conscious agents participating in this activity, knowing what they're capable of and what they're not. And so, that's the core of the case. I'm going to move on to sort of some of the objections now, and we'll say to them, but just bear in mind, it's basically a kind of social epistemic argument from, not just from the Bragg case, but trying to draw out the fact that, what the Bragg case involved. Okay. Boldly, I've just stated my response to the objection and not the objection. So, let me say why I'm saying this mysteriously on the screen. One thing you might think, and this might be sort of the move which certain kinds of anti-realists or constructive empiricists are making, is that this just shows that what scientists should do, the kind of proposal, they should retreat to weaker claims. Rather than saying something along the lines of, X causes Y, this should say something along the lines of the data collected in this experiment best supports the claim X causes Y, something like that. So in general, rather than making these claims which keep turning out to be false, or which will be unjustified like total evidence, that weaker claim would be justified in pure total evidence, right? Because you know what you did in the lab, in the good case you assume you're being honest, and you collect your data, etc. And you can specify what it means to best justify, and so you could just make that a claim which probably would be justified, might even be true. Unlikely to be a victim of pessimistic meta-induction considerations. Bragg really was offering the theory to best account for his data, to him, arguably at least. And you know, you could, at least a scientist could reasonably believe this, so long as it might apply. And our response to anything like that is to say that that misses the point. That misses the point of why the replication crisis is a crisis. That misses the point of what we want out of science. We don't care what happens in one lab. The goal isn't to find out what happened when this lab group did these things last Tuesday. No one cares. What we're interested in testing, what we want to know about, is whether or not X causes Y. We don't care about whether X causes Y. We want to know for some specification of X and Y that cause each other. But I should have thought of an example for it. But we want to know whether X causes Y. We don't want to know whether this lab has, with a better ability, justified X causes Y. And so, in the end, the thing we're putting out there, the thing the lab is telling us, if it's telling us anything we want to know, is that relationship between X and Y. And that's how scientists keep each other honest, right? That's how falsification works. They have to be offering a claim which is in some sense a bold claim. Indeed, one of the reasons I thought this was appropriate for a Popper lecture is I see this as in some sense this is kind of falsification, thinking through what it means to live in a world where falsification is capturing something about the nature of science. Scientists have to be making bold claims. Those claims need to be such that they go beyond what we can presently justify. They may well be false, and scientists can just know that they're engaged in this risky enterprise. And it's because it's those risky utterances we care about, and that's what we need to communicate. That's what needs to be avowing at the end of their paper. That's what the other scientists need to take up and test. We don't want scientists trying to test whether or not this lab really did, or replicate rather, whether or not this lab really did justify that, investigating their lab notes or something. No, we want them to try and replicate the actual claim that X causes Y. And so we think that the objection, the constructive empiricist objection, or something like the constructive empiricist objection, you should retreat to a weaker claim and just avow that one, misses the point. It misses why it is we're in this situation, why it is that we care about replication, what it is we want from science. So maybe I was a little bit disappointed when I said I'd consider objections, but I'm sure Jens will have plenty of objections, and so I'll get to the plural later. Instead, just to not be entirely negative, I will spend the last 5-10 minutes talking about a proposal for what it is we think science should be like instead. What we think a good Avowals would be, which would be consistent with the kind of observations we've made, and also would foster or allow for what we think makes science work. Okay. So we basically think that the strange thing about science is that it actually requires us to be more lax than we normally are. So the reason we conclude that the scientist class scientist makes no assertion, rather than what seems to us to be typical in other literary analytic philosophy, upon finding cases like this, you assume other people's norms of assertion are wrong. We don't want to do that. We think that people have been thinking hard about kind of everyday assertions, and they're probably catching something about what we expect from people making assertions about how many chairs in the room or something. But the odd thing about science is it actually requires us to be more lenient. It requires us to kind of let people get away with things which we wouldn't normally let people get away with. And what's happened is the process of cultural evolution inside the community, it didn't begin this way. Certainly Descartes would not have agreed that this kind of thing, we think eventually scientists have come to a place where they're sort of actually instantiating some kind of more lax norm, some norm which for some reason allows people to sort of bracket a lot of considerations which would normally rule out the kind of assertion they're making, the kind of utterance they're making as improper if it was considered as a normal assertion. So that's our analysis of what's going on, and that guides our tentative proposal. So here's what we think is going on instead. That a good avowal, what a scientific public avowal would look like in the good case, is that if one's total, you have to sort of pretend, hypothetically, imagine one's total evidence, well, what one had gathered in the methodologically proper way for one's latest study, combined with some subset, that's specified as interesting, of the previous literature. In that hypothetical world, would you be justified in believing whatever it is you allow? So that's kind of ignoring total evidence, basically. It's a systematic way of violating total evidence. And it's also weaker than effective norms. So it's a kind of hypothetical pseudo-epistemic norm of value. And we think that this captures what it is you're sort of actually held accountable for in science. It is a kind of a bad avowal. You've done something wrong to publish a paper if you didn't gather the evidence properly, or if the result you claim doesn't really fall out of your data given a proper statistical analysis. Or if in the bit of the literature you're required to review, and that is really complicated, there is someone's already proven it wrong, or showing that one of your core assumptions is very dodgy or something like that. So this is trying to build a norm around like roughly what are the standards scientists are actually held to. And if this were the norm we know, it would be consistent with all the other things we said. Like this would allow for good avowals, even given all the second order considerations about pessimistic meta-induction, the fact that we're working with weak signals and noisy data, etc. Because you're kind of just hypothetically supposing all of those away. And so it would still allow scientists to do all of those things which we think are necessary for scientific inquiry. And it would capture what we think actually goes on, roughly. This is a tentative proposal because we'd like to have a slightly more powerful, positive argument for it, rather than just it wouldn't go wrong in the ways we're accusing other people of going wrong. But that's where we are now. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on it. So that's what we propose is happening instead. And we think that we also hope that like reflecting on this gives you a sense of why those other norms were wrong. Like they were all asking scientists to be sort of consistent with too much. Asking scientists to look at too much of the world, indeed, like the actual world in some sense, rather than just a proper subset, which is what they really need to be responsive to when they're making a bit of value. And so, and so the conclusion we began by asking ourselves is, what sort of epistemic relationship should we have to the conclusions of individual scientific papers? We do not think that we should infer that they're true or justified or believed to be such, even in ideal cases. Rather, we think in the ideal case what we can conclude is they are justified relative to some conventionally specified subset of our total evidence, or maybe the total evidence of the person who's been published. That's where we think we are. So that's just on the narrow issue, and then open up for questions in a second. That's why we think the scientist class scientist doesn't make assertions insofar as they're meant to be governed by these norms, but their avowals are norm-governed, which is responsive to what the social philosophy of science requires. What do we think that tells us about our beginning issue, right? About something like the replication crisis? That's a point where we haven't thought this through together yet, and so I'm kind of raising this because I'd be interested to hear what you think. But roughly, we think this should at least guide us in thinking, it should kind of curb our enthusiasm. That there are various proposals being made for the methodological reform of science, which seem to be predicated on the idea that we definitely want there to be less replication failures. And we worry that's because facts about I say we, not what I think because we discussed this. So I worry that that's because facts about the way the dispute is happening in public are leading scientists to feel defensive, that they kind of would like people to be in the habit of inferring that when they say things it's true and they're worried their reputation is on the line or something like that. And if that is what's going on, it's a bad reason to motivate reform. This doesn't necessarily suggest something positive, but at least it suggests that some of the discourse around the replication crisis hasn't been fully in order. So hopefully that's where we're going to be able to apply these insights going forward. Okay, I think that's it. Questions? Thank you very much.